Greetings everyone, my name is Greg. In this video, I am going to be talking about my thoughts regarding the first interview I did with Mark Powers on the subject of Judaism, as well as the direction that I can foresee future interviews going as far as topic-wise that I have in mind. But before I get into the future of the interviews, I want to talk about where I feel I dropped the ball in regards to the first interview. And the only area that I see that I dropped the ball was in the subject of evolution. And that is one that I can promise you will not happen again. Because I realize I have let a pet theory or pet hypothesis that I have cloud my judgment and impede my digging into the subject of evolution and having the facts laid out before me, as well as some committed to memory. And that pet hypothesis is the idea of directed panspermia. It was one that I had come across because of watching things that Lloyd Pye had done, and I was very intrigued by his work, and I had done 2 interviews with his assistant Amy Vickers on the subject of the Star Child skull, which is another subject that I found very intriguing. But the idea of directed panspermia is one that, while I find it an intriguing idea, there isn't enough evidence to validate pursuing it as anything but an interesting idea. If there would be clear, undeniable evidence that, to use the term, evolution was aided by directed panspermia, by alien intervention type of thing, I would be very willing to go down that rabbit hole again. But without such evidence, I'm not. I am going to be focusing on what can be proven, what we do have evidence to support, not pet hypothesis ideas. The other aspect that I want to address is the aspect of it's only a theory. That is one that makes me groan, because to say evolution is only a theory, it's like, yeah, like gravity is only a theory, or like magnetism is only a theory. The thing is, evolution is very close to being termed a scientific law because of how much evidence there is to support the fact that evolution not only has occurred, but is occurring constantly. Now, I don't have before me type of thing and at my disposal all of the evidence necessary to prove the idea of evolution and the fact of evolution. And that is something where my hope is that my subscribers and anyone watching this can assist me in pointing out, like listing in the comments section, different websites that I can go to get clear, undeniable evidence of evolution, be it microevolution of a new species that the religious could try and say that's only microevolution, but microevolution leads to macro. It's just a matter of micro to micro to micro to micro. That over a long period of time, those microevolutionary steps lead to a macroevolution of the species. And it is something that really needs to be, in a sense, hammered on more with the religious, largely because of the desire that they have to cling to magical thinking. And in some ways, the aspect of magical thinking can be almost in line with what could have been, in my mind, with what would be the aspect of directed panspermia. Some could say that is also a type of magical thinking, because we don't have the evidence to support that the genetic manipulation behind that idea actually occurred. If there would be the evidence to support those claims, it would be interesting. But without the evidence, it's worthless. So in that regard, my hope is that I will be educating myself so that I am better armed in the future when I'm talking about the subject of evolution or creation with someone that is religious. Now, there were areas in the conversation or interview that I was very intrigued with, like the aspect of what was mentioned with the Genesis 2:17 from the Hebrew, that it is, in the day you eat of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, you will begin to die. That both the King James and the JPS version of the Torah and Tanakh both got the translation wrong. And that is something that I find interesting. Now, I want to say I don't believe for a second that there was to use the term, a magical tree that changed people in any capacity. What I look at that story as being is more symbolic of people coming up with a story to explain why we age and why we die, rather than a magical tree causing the aging process and so forth. But what Mark mentioned I found interesting. It doesn't mean that I regard the Bible or any of that as anything different than a Harry Potter story or Darth Vader, Star Wars type of thing, or even like Star Trek type of stories. It's still, without the evidence to support that those stories are real, then they are, and they should be, considered no different than any fictional story. And they can be examined and looked at in that capacity. But to go in any other way, is especially to try and say about it being history, is absolute bullshit. And it's something that is completely not supported by any evidence. But what I found interesting as well was also the aspect of the different perception in how Satan was perceived and is perceived in Judaism versus that of Christianity. Now, it shouldn't be that much of a surprise, really, when you think about it, because Judaism back with the Old Testament, the Torah and Tanakh, during that time, historically, there wasn't the idea of an all-good God. That didn't come about until Zoroastrianism, with Zoroaster putting forward the idea of an all-good God, with Ahura Mazda and Ahriman being the devil version in Zoroastrianism. The thing is, that is a completely different belief system than Judaism. But it is one that it seems Christianity and Christians took elements of Zoroastrianism and incorporated that mindset into their belief system, which could be, in a sense, one of the left turns that Mark had alluded to, that Christians have made in their ideas regarding Judaism. But I also, and I didn't want to get into in the first discussion or conversation interview, the subject of morality, because that is such a big issue, and I didn't want to touch on it, and knowing that I didn't want the video to be too long. I had decided in the making of the video process that I was going to do sections instead of 1 hour and a half long video, having it in 3 parts, which I feel overall that there's nothing that is lost. It is simply having it in 3 parts means you can have shorter bits to focus on different specific topics. But it's something that I want to address, the subject of morality, especially in a video or in a conversation all to itself, or the aspect of morality and free will again, because there's so much more with the subject of free will that I want to also touch on, especially the idea that Mark had mentioned that angels have no free will, that they can only do what this God wants, because there are a lot of, to use the term, moral implications behind that. That type of thing, it does not fit with the idea of a God that is secure with the aspect of its own supreme nature. Because if you have to maintain an iron-fisted, you will do what I want and I know all the outcomes type of thing, then that tells me that being, or whatever it would be, really and truly is extremely insecure. That it has to know all of the end results, that it can't handle life as we experience it, that would be, in a sense, beyond what it could handle because of not knowing how things are going to turn out, because it is such of a control freak. And that is part of the way I regard the God of the Bible. It is an absolute narcissistic, psychopathic control freak. But there's also some of the things that were mentioned in the first conversation, but not really, in a sense, expounded on, was when I said about a difference between the God of Genesis 1:1 to Genesis 2:3 and the Lord God of Genesis 2:4 through the rest of the Bible. The thing is, in the first chapter and a few verses into chapter 2, the figure that is termed God is loving what he's creating. He looks at it and he says over and over again, it is good, it is good, it is very good. But when the Lord God shows up, it is a fucking prick that is looking at finding fault with every little thing. Everything pisses it off. It is one that is making all these wacky restrictions on people that would be not knowing enough to know whether or not a choice is good or bad. And I'm sorry, a choice is not good or bad based on what a parent or authority figure says. That would be like saying the Holocaust was a good thing because Hitler said it was. That is obnoxious. Or to try and say that molesting a child is a good thing because a parent says that it is. Bullshit. Might does not make right. Just because you're the most powerful or you're the leader doesn't mean you can do whatever you want and that makes it good because you're the leader. What you do is good or bad based on how it treats and how you're treating someone else. Empathy has to factor in. You can't just have it be an authoritarian, I'm the supreme, so whatever I say is the right thing. No. Morally, there has to be more to it than that. Morals are not based on do what I say or I'll hurt you, and that is right so long as I'm the supreme one. Bullshit. Absolute bullshit. That is an absolutely immoral position that someone could try and take. But it is one, if that is the direction Mark tries to go with it, I can't say I'll tear into him on it, but I am not going to back down and just, in a sense, roll over. No way. Because that type of thing, it is absolutely obnoxious. It would be like saying Darth Vader was right because he was the Supreme, or the Emperor. What he did was right because he was the Supreme. Bull. Absolute garbage. It doesn't work that way. You have to look at how their actions are impacting others. There's more to it than just, does it fit your tribe, your group, your clique? And that is an area where I think not just one sect, but all religious fall into this. That as long as something is benefiting their group, they'll go along with it. And that is something that I do want to address. But also, future videos, one of the things that I have in mind is to go through the Torah and Tanakh, not covering, in a sense, every possible topic and every possible way this can be thought of, because that would make the interviews and so forth and conversations almost endless in the amount of things that we could talk about. But I do want to talk about the aspect of slavery, as well as what is termed indentured servitude and that type of thing, as well as child abuse, women being regarded as property, the aspect of the Jewish Sabbath and the things that the God expects in that regard, as well as, like I did the series on the 613 laws of the Torah, I want to go through those as well and touch on them again with Mark to see if we can get at a little bit more understanding regarding the 613 laws than I could go into when I did them in that series. But then there's the aspect of where Jesus comes into this and the claims made by Christians. And that is in itself an area that we will be going. Because Mark and I, we've talked about that, and he knows that I have an axe to grind against Christianity. And he had said it seemed strange. He said this to me when an off-the-record type of thing of, it seemed strange to him that I was, in a sense, using Judaism to combat Christianity. And I had said the reason I'm doing that is Judaism completely debunks Christianity. And Christianity tries to ride the coattails of Judaism and claim that their ideas are based on Judaism when they're not. That my interest is to get at the truth. And that hasn't changed. From when I was 16 and said I wanted to know everything there is to know about God, even now at 42, I still want to know everything I possibly can about what I regard as this fictional character. And even the character of Satan and all of that shit. Even though I can tell with Judaism and from what Mark has said, there isn't the you have to make a choice between God and Satan type of thing. That's not the way Judaism operates. That's not how they look at this. But I also want to talk with him about the aspect of heaven and hell, the ideas of like forgiveness and how somebody that is Jewish goes about being forgiven, things of that nature. But there are things that, because I work with a guy that is Mennonite, and when I mentioned at work about the interview that I did, he was giving me the hairy eyeball on the evolution subject, and I could tell he wanted to say something. And he started spouting the Christian bullshit of evolution not being true and so forth, and I was just kind of letting it roll. But he had said it with the flood of that the rain wasn't just rain, that it was hurricane type rain. And I had said to him that I would ask Mark about that if that is what is in the Hebrew. And I will. Because my personal gut feeling is he's full of shit. That type of thing, I doubt that type of classification for rain would have even been around at that time. So to say that it would have been hurricane type of winds, bull. And because that, I think, is just someone's trying to push their religious agenda. But be that as it may, it's something that I will ask Mark about, as well as a follow-up on the Cain and Abel type of shit with where did the aspect of Cain getting his wife from the land of Nod, if the Bible is to be considered accurate, the only people that should have, at that time in Genesis 4, have been alive would have been Adam, Eve, and Cain, because Abel was killed. So the aspect of where he would have gotten a wife from this other area, it raises the question of where'd she come from? And if you're having these mysterious people just showing up in other cultures and in other places of the world, it raises the question of, did this God create everyone? Or are there only some that it did? As well as the idea of why is it that if this God is a force behind the universe type of thing, that it doesn't have a form, as Mark had said, then why would it call the Jews its people? Why would it play favorites with picking this group of humans over this other? It makes no sense, and it shows a prejudice or a bias that from a God doesn't make sense. It makes sense if you look at it as those are the people that not came up with the name of the God, because that isn't what happened. The name of the God, be it El or whatnot, were from the Canaanite pantheon. And it also raises the question of how many of the stories that were in Judaism actually came from earlier cultures like the Sumerians or bleed through with the Egyptians. Some of those things I probably won't be able to get an answer from Mark, but those are things to consider. But I hope you enjoy the series, and if you have any other topics that you would like to hear us talk about, by all means, share them in the comments section. Because I also think we are going to be talking about the aspect of Sodom and Gomorrah and why that was destroyed as far as from the Jewish point of view. And other stories like the Jephthah and his daughter, where he burned her as a sacrifice because he was successful in a battle. But overall, if there are other stories that you would like to hear Mark and I talk about, by all means, share them in the comment section, and in a sense, I'll add them to the list type of thing. But I also, in the aspect of Jesus, to touch on this briefly, what I have in mind is the claims that are made by Christians of so many prophecies fulfilled by Jesus in the Old Testament. That video where we talk about that, I'll try to do it in a more of a, almost like a rapid fire type of thing, as much as we can, regarding the different claims of a prophecy of Jesus, and because there's so many of them that Christians try and say that might need to be a few interviews in and of itself to fully cover those and fully, to use the term, debunk those claims, as well as going into what exactly are the messianic criteria and why Jesus didn't get the job done, as well as why the Immaculate Conception idea simply doesn't work, and things of that nature. But feel free to leave your comments in the comment section and let me know what you think of the series thus far and the direction you would like to see things go. But talk to you later, people.